At 2:17 in the morning, my best friend texted my wife. "She's asleep. I'll call you tomorrow." And the problem was, she was lying right next to me. I didn't move, didn't breathe any differently, didn't even blink at first, just stared at the glow of my phone screen lighting up the dark bedroom like it was trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear, because for 15 years I thought I understood my life. I thought I understood my marriage. I thought I understood the man I called my brother. But in that single moment, something shifted. Something quiet and cold settling into my chest like a truth that had been waiting patiently for me to notice it, and the strange part wasn't the message itself, it was how calm I felt reading it, like my brain had already started connecting dots I didn't consciously remember drawing, because when you've known someone for 20 years, when you've built a life with someone for 15, nothing ever really comes out of nowhere, it just feels that way when you finally see it clearly. I turned my head slightly and looked at Emily. Her breathing steady, her face relaxed, the same face I'd kissed goodbye every morning before work, the same face that smiled across dinner tables and family holidays, and for a second I almost convinced myself it was nothing, a wrong number, a late-night confusion, anything but what it looked like, but then I read it again, slower this time. "She's asleep." And that line didn't just sit there, it echoed, because it meant he thought she wasn't with me, it meant he thought I wasn't there. And people don't make that kind of mistake unless they've made it 100 times before. I locked my phone and set it back down on the nightstand, careful, controlled, like I was placing evidence instead of a device, and I stared up at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the silence in the room press down on me, not loud, not dramatic, just heavy, like something important had just quietly broken without making a sound, and the longer I lay there, the more things started to resurface, small moments. Harmless at the time, things I never questioned because I trusted them both. Late nights Emily said she was out with friends, weekends when Daniel conveniently stopped by when I was out of town, the way they laughed together a little too easily, the way I never once thought to doubt it because why would I? He was my best friend, the guy who stood next to me at my wedding, the guy who toasted to our future, the guy I trusted enough to give a spare key to my house, and as I lay there in the dark, listening to the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the soft rhythm of her breathing, one thought kept circling in my mind, steady and unavoidable, not loud, not emotional, just precise, like a blade finding its mark. This didn't start tonight, this didn't start last week, this didn't start with one message. Whatever this was, it had roots, deep ones, and for the first time in 15 years, I realized I might not have been living in a marriage, I might have been living in a story I didn't fully understand. And the worst part wasn't the message, it wasn't even the possibility of betrayal, it was the realization that if I was just now seeing it, then it had been happening right in front of me the entire time, hidden in plain sight, waiting for one small crack to let the truth slip through. I did not sleep that night, not even for a minute, because once your mind starts pulling on a thread like that, it does not stop until something unravels. And lying there in the dark, I realized I had a choice to make, the kind of choice that separates men who react from men who understand. I could wake her up, confront her, demand answers that would come wrapped in denial and half-truths. Or I could stay quiet and let the truth reveal itself on its own terms, and for reasons I could not fully explain in that moment, I chose silence, not because I was afraid, but because something in me needed to see how deep this went, how far back it reached. Because one message like that does not exist in isolation, it belongs to a pattern, and patterns leave trails if you are patient enough to follow them. So I waited until her breathing settled into that deeper rhythm that meant she was fully asleep, then I reached over slowly, carefully, and picked up her phone from the nightstand, the same phone she guarded without making it obvious, always face down, always within reach, habits I had noticed but never questioned. Because trust has a way of turning red flags into background noise, I held the phone in my hand for a second, feeling the weight of what I was about to do, not as a betrayal of her privacy, but as a response to something that had already crossed the line long before tonight, and when I turned the screen on, my pulse stayed steady, almost too steady, like my body had already accepted what my mind was still catching up to. I tried her passcode once, the same one she had used years ago. And when it did not work, I did not feel frustration, just confirmation. People only change passwords when they have something to protect, something specific, something ongoing, and instead of forcing it, I set the phone back exactly where I found it. Because this was not about rushing, it was about precision, and as I lay back down, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling, the memories started to come faster now, clearer, like someone had adjusted the focus on a lens I had been looking through my entire life. I remembered the first time Emily introduced Daniel as her friend too, the way she said his name with an ease that felt natural. I remembered how quickly they became comfortable around each other, how inside jokes formed that I was not always part of. And at the time I told myself that was normal, that was what happened when the people you loved got along, but now those same moments felt different, heavier, like they carried a meaning I had missed. I thought about the business trips I had taken over the years, weeks at a time sometimes, trusting that home was still home while I was gone, trusting that the life I was working to support stayed intact in my absence, and I wondered how many of those nights had looked exactly like this one. Quiet on the surface, something else entirely underneath, and the more I thought about it, the more one idea settled in with a kind of quiet certainty that did not need proof yet to feel true. This was not new, this was not recent, this was practiced, rehearsed, comfortable, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a question formed that I could not ignore anymore, not loud, not panicked, just steady, like everything else had become. If tonight was just a mistake, then why did it feel like I had just walked in on something that had been going on for years? Morning came like it always did, quiet, predictable, sunlight slipping through the blinds in thin lines across the bedroom wall, and for a moment, if I ignored everything from the night before, it almost felt normal. Emily stirred beside me, stretched slightly, then reached for her phone without hesitation, the same routine I had seen 1,000 times, except now I was watching it differently, not as a husband sharing a morning, but as someone observing details that suddenly mattered. Her eyes flicked across the screen for just a second longer than usual, then she locked it and set it down, her expression unchanged, calm, controlled, practiced, and that word stayed with me, practiced, because nothing about her reaction felt accidental, it felt refined, like something repeated enough times to become second nature. She smiled at me, soft, familiar, asked if I wanted coffee, and I nodded like I always did, matching her tone, matching her rhythm, because whatever this was, it had been happening long before I noticed, and reacting too early would only give it a chance to hide again. So I followed her into the kitchen, watched her move through the motions of our life, pouring coffee, opening the fridge, asking about my schedule, small talk that used to feel comforting but now sounded like lines in a script I had not realized we were reading from, and as she spoke, my mind was somewhere else entirely, replaying years of conversations, missed calls, late arrivals, every moment that had once felt ordinary now demanding a second look. And then she said it, casual, almost automatic. She mentioned she might meet Daniel later, just to catch up, just something quick, and if there had been any doubt left in me, that sentence erased it, not because of what she said, but because of how easily it fit into everything else, how natural it sounded, like a routine that had been running uninterrupted for years. I took a sip of coffee, let the bitterness sit on my tongue, and simply nodded, no questions, no hesitation, because the last thing I needed right now was an answer she had already rehearsed. What I needed was clarity, and clarity does not come from confrontation, it comes from observation, from letting people show you who they are when they believe you are not looking. And the rest of that morning passed in a strange kind of quiet, not the peaceful kind, but the kind where every word feels measured, every glance analyzed, every silence filled with something unspoken. I left the house like I always did, keys in hand, a quick goodbye at the door, and as I stepped outside into the cool morning air, I paused for just a second, looking back at the house, the same house I had worked years to build, the same place I thought held everything stable and real. And I realized something that settled deeper than anything else so far. Whatever was happening inside those walls did not start with that message, it did not even start with her behavior this morning, it started long before I ever had a reason to question it, and if I wanted the truth, the full truth, I was going to have to go back, not just to last night, not just to this week, but to the beginning, to the moments I trusted without thinking, to the days I believed everything was exactly what it seemed, because somewhere in those memories, hidden in plain sight, was the answer to a question I could no longer ignore. How long had I actually been the only one who thought this life was real? Work did not feel like work that day. It felt like a place to sit still while my mind kept moving, because once you start looking backward with a different lens, everything changes shape. Every memory stops being what it was and becomes something else entirely, something layered, something unfinished, and I found myself replaying moments I had not thought about in years, not because they were important back then, but because now they felt like pieces of something I had missed. I remembered the night I introduced Emily to Daniel, a small get-together at my place, nothing special, just drinks, music, the kind of night you forget about unless something makes you remember it differently. And what stood out now was not what they said or did, but how quickly they clicked, how natural it felt, like they had skipped the part where people learn each other and went straight to familiarity. At the time I took pride in that. I thought it meant my worlds blended well, that the people I trusted could trust each other. But sitting there at my desk years later, I realized something I had not considered before. Familiarity that fast does not grow, it recognizes. And that thought stayed with me longer than I expected, because it did not accuse, it suggested, it asked a quiet question I was not sure I wanted answered. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling tiles above me, the same dull pattern repeated across the entire office, and I started mapping out timelines in my head, not exact dates, not precise details. Just general markers, when we got engaged, when we got married, when Daniel started coming around more often, when the late nights became normal, and the unsettling part was not finding a gap, it was realizing there was no gap at all. Everything overlapped too cleanly, too smoothly, like two lines running parallel without ever crossing in a way that would cause alarm. And that was when it hit me, not like a shock, but like a quiet realization settling into place. This was not something that interrupted our life, it existed alongside it, hidden not by secrecy alone, but by routine, by trust, by the simple fact that I never had a reason to question it. And the more I thought about it, the more I understood why it had lasted this long, because nothing about it demanded attention, nothing about it forced a confrontation. It lived in the spaces I was not looking at, the hours I was not present, the moments I assumed were exactly what they appeared to be. And I wondered how many times I had unknowingly stepped around the truth without ever seeing it. How many times I had laughed with Daniel, shared a drink, talked about life, completely unaware that there was another version of that same life happening just out of view, and for a second, I closed my eyes and let that thought sit there, heavy but controlled, because reacting to it would not change anything, understanding it might, and when I opened my eyes again, I did not feel anger, not yet. What I felt was something quieter, something more focused, the need to know exactly where this began, exactly how deep it went, because if there was one thing I was certain of now, it was this: whatever I thought my past looked like, it was not the full picture. And somewhere in that past was the moment everything changed. I just had to find it. By the time I drove home that evening, I was no longer guessing, I was watching, and there is a difference between the two that changes everything. Because guessing looks for answers while watching lets them come to you, and as I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something I would have ignored any other day, a car that had been here before, not often enough to stand out, but enough to feel familiar, Daniel's car. Parked just slightly off to the side like it did not fully belong there, and I sat in my own car for a moment, engine still running, hands resting on the wheel, not reacting, just observing. Because this was what I needed now, not emotion, not confrontation, just clarity. And when I finally stepped out, I did not rush, I did not slam the door, I walked up to my house the same way I always did, keys in hand, expression neutral, the picture of a man returning home after a normal day. And when I opened the front door, the first thing I noticed was laughter, soft, easy, comfortable, the kind of laughter that does not belong to something new or secret, but to something established, something practiced. And that word came back again, practiced. It followed me as I stepped inside, as I saw them sitting in the living room, not close enough to raise suspicion on the surface, not distant enough to feel formal. Just balanced in that careful space that only exists when two people know exactly how far they can go without being questioned. Emily looked up first, her expression shifting for just a fraction of a second before settling into something warm and familiar. Daniel followed, smiling the same way he always did, casual, relaxed, like he had every right to be there. And maybe that was the most unsettling part. It did not feel like I had walked into something wrong. It felt like I had walked into something routine, something that had happened enough times to feel normal to them. And as I stood there, taking it in without letting it show, I realized that whatever this was, it was not fragile, it was stable, built over time, reinforced by repetition. And that explained everything else, the ease, the confidence, the lack of hesitation. Because people only act that way when they are used to not being questioned, I greeted them both the same way I always had, calm, steady, no shift in tone, because breaking character now would only warn them, and I was not here to warn anyone. I was here to understand, to see how far this extended, how deeply it was woven into the life I thought I knew, and as the evening moved forward, I paid attention to everything. The way Emily moved around him, the way Daniel spoke, the small glances that meant nothing on their own but formed a pattern when you saw them together, and for the first time, I was not part of the moment, I was outside of it, watching it unfold with a clarity I had never had before, and somewhere in the middle of that quiet observation, one thought settled in with absolute certainty. This was not a secret they were trying to hide in panic, this was a reality they had grown comfortable living inside. And the only person who had not seen it until now was me. That night, after Daniel left and the house settled back into its usual quiet, something had changed in me, not in a loud or dramatic way, but in a precise, controlled way, like a switch had been flipped from reacting to calculating, because I understood now that whatever truth I was dealing with was not going to reveal itself through confrontation, it was going to reveal itself through patterns, through consistency, through the small details people forget to hide when they believe they are safe. And for the first time in years, I stopped living inside my life and started studying it. I watched how Emily moved through the evening, how she checked her phone when she thought I was not paying attention, how her responses came just a second too fast when I asked simple questions, not enough to seem suspicious on the surface, but enough to confirm something underneath. And when she finally went to bed, I stayed up, sitting alone in the dim light of the living room, letting everything I had seen that day settle into place, because what I needed now was not emotion, it was structure. A way to take everything I suspected and turn it into something undeniable, something clear, and that meant going beyond observation, it meant verification, and sometime after midnight, I made a decision that felt less like a risk and more like a step I should have taken years ago. I got up, walked quietly to the hallway closet, and pulled out an old box of electronics I had not touched in years, cables, outdated devices, things that once served a purpose and were forgotten, until now, and as I went through it, I found exactly what I was looking for, a small backup phone I had kept from an old plan, still functional, still capable, and more importantly, invisible in a way that newer devices were not. I turned it on, watched the screen flicker to life, and felt that same steady calm settle in again, because this was no longer about wondering, it was about knowing, and over the next hour, I set something in motion. Simple, quiet, nothing complicated, just a way to see what was already happening without interfering with it. A way to let the truth come to me without alerting anyone that I was looking for it. And when I finally went to bed, I did not feel restless, I did not feel angry, I felt focused, because for the first time since that message appeared on my phone, I was no longer behind whatever this was, I was catching up to it, step by step. And the next morning, when Emily smiled at me the same way she always did, when she moved through the kitchen with that same practiced ease, I matched it perfectly, every word, every expression, every routine, because the strongest position you can have is the one where the other person does not know you have already seen the truth. And as I walked out the door again, keys in hand, I realized something with absolute clarity. Whatever this was, however long it had been going on, it was about to reach a point where it could not stay hidden anymore, not because I was going to expose it immediately, but because I was finally in a position to understand it completely. And once you understand something completely, there is only one thing left to decide, what you are going to do with it. The first real confirmation did not come in a dramatic moment, it came quietly, exactly the way everything else had, and that was what made it impossible to ignore, because over the next few days, I stopped relying on instinct and started relying on what I could see, what I could verify, what I could repeat, and patterns began to form with a kind of precision that left no room for doubt. Emily's schedule had a rhythm I had never paid attention to before, certain afternoons where she was always unavailable, certain evenings where her explanations were consistent but slightly too rehearsed, and Daniel's presence in our lives, something I once saw as natural, now aligned with those same windows of time in a way that felt too exact to be coincidence. And what made it worse was not just that it was happening, but how smoothly it had been integrated into everything else. Like a second layer running underneath our life that I had never noticed because I was only looking at the surface. And one afternoon, sitting in my car across the street from a small coffee place I had driven past 100 times without thinking, I saw it with my own eyes, not speculation, not theory, but reality. Emily walking in, checking her phone once, then sitting down at a corner table like she had done it before, like she knew exactly where to go, and a few minutes later, Daniel walked in, no hesitation, no confusion. Just a direct path to her, and when he sat down, there was no awkwardness, no distance. Just that same ease I had seen in my living room, only now it made sense in a way it never had before, and I stayed there, watching from a distance, not because I needed to confirm what I already knew, but because I needed to understand the scale of it, the comfort, the familiarity, the complete absence of caution, and in that moment, something became undeniable. This was not an occasional mistake, this was not something that started recently, this was established, maintained, and protected over time, and as I watched them talk, laugh, lean slightly toward each other in a way that felt natural to them, I realized something that settled deeper than anything else so far. I was not witnessing the beginning of something breaking. I was witnessing something that had been whole for a very long time, just not with me. And when I finally drove away, I did not feel the urge to confront them, I did not feel the need to interrupt what I had seen, because confrontation would only give them a chance to reshape the narrative, to minimize, to explain, to deny, and I was past that point now. What I had seen was enough, not just as evidence, but as clarity, and as I sat at a red light a few blocks away, one thought moved through my mind with a kind of calm certainty that did not need to be forced. Whatever this had been for the last 15 years, whatever version of reality they had been living inside, it was about to collide with the one I was finally seeing clearly, and when that happened, there would be no way for it to stay hidden anymore. By the time the pattern was undeniable, the only thing left to decide was how to end it, because endings are not about emotion, they are about timing, and timing, if done right, changes everything. So I did not rush, I did not confront, I did not even change my behavior in a way that would raise suspicion. Instead I refined it, made it cleaner, more predictable, more in line with the version of me they had always known. Because the more consistent I appeared, the less they would question anything around them, and over the next few days I gathered what I needed, not in a frantic way, but in a precise, methodical way, screenshots, timestamps, patterns, enough to build a picture that did not rely on explanation, a picture that spoke for itself, because the truth is strongest when it does not need to argue. And as I built that picture, one thing became clear: this was not just about them. It was about the illusion they had maintained, the life they had constructed around me, without ever letting me see it, and if I was going to end it, I was not going to do it in a way that gave them control of the narrative, I was going to do it in a way that removed their ability to rewrite it, and that meant one thing: simplicity, not a long speech, not a dramatic confrontation, just one move, one moment that forced everything into the open at the same time, and the opportunity came sooner than I expected. Because Emily mentioned a small dinner later that week, nothing formal, just something casual with a few people, including Daniel, and when she said it, her tone was steady, normal, the same tone she had used countless times before. But now I understood what it really meant. It was not just a dinner, it was part of the pattern, part of the routine they had grown comfortable inside, and I agreed without hesitation, because this was exactly what I needed, a setting where everything intersected. where their two worlds overlapped in a way they believed was safe, and in the days leading up to it, I prepared in silence, not outwardly, nothing visible, but internally, aligning every piece of what I had seen, what I had confirmed, what I was about to do, because once this happened, there would be no version of events they could reshape, no explanation that could undo what was already clear. And on the night of that dinner, as I stood in the mirror adjusting my tie, looking at the same reflection I had seen for years, I realized something that settled everything into place. I was not walking into a confrontation, I was walking into a conclusion, and conclusions do not need to be loud, they just need to be final. And as I picked up my phone, feeling its weight in my hand, I knew exactly what that final moment was going to look like, not complicated, not dramatic, just one message, sent at the right time, to the right people, containing just enough truth to make everything else collapse on its own. The restaurant was exactly what you would expect. Low lighting softened every edge, quiet conversations layered gently over one another without ever rising high enough to demand attention, the kind of place where everything felt intentionally controlled, where even silence seemed curated, where nothing stood out unless it was meant to. And as we sat there, Emily across from me and Daniel just slightly to her side, angled in a way that looked natural to anyone not paying attention but now felt deliberate to me, I realized how perfectly this setting mirrored the life they had been living, polished on the surface, carefully balanced underneath, every detail in place. Every movement measured just enough to avoid suspicion, and for most of the evening nothing seemed out of place, not to anyone else. They talked, they laughed, they moved through the familiar rhythm I had watched for years without ever questioning it, the same ease, the same timing, the same subtle coordination that had allowed them to exist inside that shared illusion without breaking it, and I played my part just as seamlessly, calm, present, responding when spoken to, engaging just enough to maintain the flow, withdrawing just enough to observe, because this was never about creating a scene, never about exposing anything in a way that demanded attention from the room around us. It was about ending something that had already run its course, and endings like that require precision, require patience, require the willingness to let the moment arrive instead of forcing it. So I waited, through the appetizers that none of us really tasted, through the main course where conversation drifted between safe topics and rehearsed familiarity, through the small talk that filled the space between what was real and what was being hidden, and at one point I watched as Emily reached for her phone under the table, a movement so small it would have gone unnoticed before, but now stood out with a kind of clarity that made it impossible to ignore, and Daniel's expression shifted, just slightly, a glance that lasted less than a second but carried more meaning than anything they had said out loud all evening, and that was enough. Enough to confirm that even here, even now, they were still operating inside that same pattern, that same quiet connection they believed existed beyond anyone else's awareness. And that was the moment I understood it wasn't about waiting for something new to happen, it was about recognizing that nothing had changed, that everything was continuing exactly as it had been, and that realization, more than anything else, made the timing clear. So I reached for my phone, not rushed, not dramatic, just another ordinary movement in a series of ordinary actions, and I opened the message thread I had already prepared, the one that included both of them. The one that had been sitting there waiting for this exact moment, and for a second I looked at the screen. Not to reconsider, not to hesitate, but to recognize how simple it all came down to after everything, after 15 years of shared history, of assumptions, of things said and unsaid, of moments that now carried different meanings than they once did. It came down to a single line, a single action that required no explanation because the truth it carried was already complete, already formed long before I ever typed it. And then I wrote the final words, not quickly, not emotionally, just with clarity. 15 years. I hope it was worth it. My lawyer already has everything. And I pressed send, setting the phone back down on the table with the same calm motion I had used all evening, as if nothing had shifted, as if the moment hadn't just been set in motion, and for a few seconds nothing did happen. The restaurant continued as it always had, conversations flowing, glasses touching, soft laughter rising and falling in the background, until it didn't. Until both of their phones lit up almost simultaneously, until I watched the Change unfold across their faces in real time, confusion first, that brief flicker of not understanding what they were seeing, then recognition as the words registered, as the meaning connected, and then something heavier settling in behind it, something that couldn't be masked or redirected or explained away, and neither of them spoke, not immediately, not to me, not to each other. Because there was nothing available to them in that moment that could undo what had just been placed in front of them, no version of events that could reshape it, no denial that could hold against something already exposed, and I didn't interrupt that silence, didn't rush to fill it. I let it expand, let it take its full shape, because silence, when it carries truth, has a weight that words can't replicate, and after a moment I stood up, not abruptly, not with anger or force, just calmly, like a man who had reached the end of something and understood there was no reason to stay beyond it, and I looked at them one last time, not searching for reactions, not waiting for responses. Just seeing them clearly, without the layers that had once blurred everything. Because whatever this had been, whatever version of reality they had constructed and maintained for 15 years, it had ended in that exact moment, not with noise, not with confrontation, but with something far more final, the truth delivered in a way that didn't require acknowledgement to be real. And as I turned and walked out into the night, the air cool and steady against my skin, I felt the shift fully settle, not as relief, not as release, but as clarity, something clean, something complete, and I didn't look back, because there was nothing left behind that belonged to me anymore, no part of that table, that room, or that life that still required my presence, and for the first time since everything had begun to unravel, the quiet I felt wasn't forced or fragile, it was natural, grounded, something that didn't need to be maintained, and as the distance between me and that restaurant grew, it became clear that what I had left behind wasn't just a moment, or a relationship. It was an entire version of reality that no longer existed, and walking away from it didn't feel like loss, it felt like accuracy, like finally stepping into something that no longer required me to question what I already knew.